Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelechenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Laborless, an immigration tech platform that automates H-1B visa and PERM compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, a digital marketing agency focused on the immigration and global mobility industry. Today is episode number 148, and our guest today is the CEO and founder of a company called the Cozm, Benjamin Oghene. And so the Cozm is a tech company, an AI-based tech company that's focused on the global mobility industry. So it helps immigration teams in-house, as well as immigration law firms and other companies in the industry who handle global mobility, automate a lot of the repetitive tasks, uses AI to make them more efficient. And effectively, the idea is to give them back their time to work on the more human aspects of global mobility, which we know the industry is all about the human, with a lot of paperwork and a lot of administrative stuff that takes up a lot of time. And so the Cozm is focused on getting rid of or automating the manual stuff to let people do their work. So I'm really excited for this call, for this conversation. Benjamin is joining us from England. So I'm really, really grateful for that. Before we jump in, I just want to say a quick thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So for all the immigration lawyers and in-house teams, especially those who do U.S. immigration, DocketWise is an end-to-end case management platform built with best-in-class immigration forms. I mean, that's really one of their key items. And in fact, many people use DocketWise even just for forms when they use other case management platforms as well. They have really customizable questionnaires in a ton of different languages so that you can send those questionnaires to your clients, companies, or individuals. And they have industry-leading integrations, including with my company, Laborless. Great customer service. One of the things I always talk about, that I like about DocketWise is that they provide a lot of content for the industry. So DocketWise has a really great blog on their website, free ebooks, a podcast, a lot of different resources for lawyers to learn about different practice areas, change their practice area, learn about marketing, technology, you name it. So if you're interested in DocketWise, checking them out, visit 8am, so the number 8am.com/DocketWise, or check the link in the show notes. And of course, tell them that you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. So without further ado, Benjamin, thank you, sir, for being here. I appreciate it. And super excited to learn more about you and what you're building at the Cozm.
Thanks for having me here, Roman. Really good to speak to another entrepreneur. It's cool.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? And that's the whole, for me, premise of the show. There was really, in my view, at least before I started the show, I felt that there wasn't too much interest in or attention to like the immigration and global mobility tech space, and there were a lot of great companies already, but nobody was telling their story. Nobody was interviewing the founders. So I really started this kind of on a whim during COVID, and like somehow, right, here we are 6 years later with 148 episodes. So
amazing.
So you are currently based in London, but you've got a really interesting background. You were born in Sweden to Nigerian parents. There's a lot of immigration already going on in that. So before we even get to your career, to your schooling, and obviously to the business that you've built, can you share a little bit about, like maybe your parents' journey from Nigeria to Sweden and sort of, you growing up between the three countries? Like, what can you share about that?
I'd say Sweden and Nigeria are probably polar opposites for many, many reasons. The obvious thing is the weather, how spicy food is. It's the other one extreme to the other, and I would say just about everything culturally. So I see it as a positive. So I was born in Stockholm in Sweden, and then at 11 we moved to Nigeria, where my parents were born. And so yes, a bit of a culture shock, but maybe a good thing just to get exposure to very different cultures and different ways of living. Uh, and then at 17, I moved to the UK first to West London. Yeah.
What was it like for you? I mean, you were growing up in Sweden in sort of an immigrant household. Sweden is a pretty homogenous country
Mhm.
culturally, so you stood out just by nature. So kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, what was that like for you, I guess? I mean, were you friends with other kids who were immigrants? Were there a lot of immigrants in especially Nigerian or just African immigrants in general? Like, kind of, what do you
Yeah.
remember about that from early days?
There was one other black kid in my school, and he was my brother.
Nice.
My actual brother.
Right.
so, so no, not a lot of diversity in my school, but I didn't know anything different.
Mhm.
So it might be harder for people who move to a different country, but if that's all you know, then that's all you know. So it's very hard for me to say if if that was very different, if it was harder, if it was easier, because I don't know anything different.
Yeah, it just was your reality.
This was, and then the other move to Nigeria is similar, right? So I moved to Nigeria not speaking any Nigerian languages or anything, so became foreign again in a
Mhm.
different country. So that's all I've known, and I think yes, there are probably challenges that I'm not aware of, not as aware as aware of as maybe others would be. But I think it's a good thing. I think global mobility is a beautiful thing. It helps you to see more of humanity, I think, and what makes us similar and less of what makes us different. Yeah.
Do you know, I mean, I don't know if your parents ever talked about this, but, what was it like for them to move from, Nigeria to Sweden? Obviously for you, I hear you. I mean, this is how you grew up and, it's just your reality, whether it was easy, difficult, whatever it might be. It almost doesn't matter because you had no choice. But
Yes.
I suppose they made that choice, right, to move to Sweden. Do you know what was it like for them? I mean, was it easier or more difficult for them to, sort of build a life and have friends and integrate, or did it feel natural? Like, what do you remember about that, if anything?
My dad was always more of an extrovert, uh, so maybe easier to make friends and connect with people. Um, a bit of a prankster. So he got my mom to walk the wrong way up an escalator or something, just tricking her that that's what people do. so, so because she was newer than he was, and I think she had a harder time just
Mm.
making friends and uh, integrating in a society, and a society in general where people tend to keep to themselves more than most countries in general. Doesn't matter where you're from or what your culture is. So I think she found it harder than he did.
Mhm.
Uh, but again, it's hard for me to say because
Yeah.
I wasn't there every day. Yeah.
So tell me about, then you had this idea where you kind of repatriated. I mean, in a sense, right? Back to Nigeria. Were you living in Lagos or somewhere else?
Yeah, I was in Lagos. Lagos is like I said, very, very different from Sweden. I'll tell you something. We had all kinds of stuff happen. I might not go into too much detail in this sort of show, but the kinds of things where I thought, wow, there's such a huge gap between the rich and the poor in this
Mhm.
country, and that creates all kinds of dynamics, which in some ways is good, helps people to be super ambitious. In some ways is it's bad because you can just see real poverty and then you can see real wealth
Mhm.
pretty much next door.
Were there, I mean, Nigeria, I think, is the largest, or, one of the largest economies in the African continent. Did you see, you know, like, did you feel that at all? I've never been. I really would love to visit.
Yeah,
Now, at this point, I know at least a handful of people who are in
yeah.
Nigeria. Did you see that, especially coming from such a wealthy country? Sweden with a small population,
Mhm,
very high sovereign wealth, very high, I guess, personal wealth to some extent, and then you
mhm,
came to this country with a massive population, with, as you said, a pretty big wage gap, a lot of poverty, and of course, many people that are extremely wealthy. Did you see, or, at that time and during those kind of teenage years, Nigeria striving for, or kind of like growing in the direction of being a more, I guess I hate to use the word developed, but I guess wealthy nation?
Um, I think it still has, and probably has for a long time, had a lot of wealth, just not as evenly distributed as in
Hmm.
Sweden. So I would say generally, um, people that are wealthy in Nigeria are wealthy beyond what I've seen in most places around the world. And I've been to a lot of countries around the world.
Hmm.
And Sweden, and to a certain extent the UK, then there isn't that much of a gap. So it depends on what you define as wealth.
Hmm.
So uh, I think the kind of wealth that you see in Nigeria is very rare in Sweden, somewhat rare in the UK.
Interesting.
But then also the kind of poverty you see in Nigeria is rare in almost non-existent in Sweden and very rare in the UK.
Yeah. Were you, as a child, like a child teenager, I mean, do you find that you were more kind of studious? I mean, I know you obviously went into engineering, and you became a computer programmer. But do you find that you were kind of always a studious kid, or were you kind of entrepreneurial, hacking things, selling things, or maybe a mix of both?
No, not at all. No. So I think so. I liked sports. I liked to go out and stuff. There was a teacher who told me that I was talented in this stuff, especially maths, and gave me a lot of encouragement and kind of put his arm around me and try to get me to focus. But I don't think I was naturally a focused person at all. Um, and maybe a little bit lazy, if I'm honest. I just assumed that I didn't have to study. I just had to do enough to do okay or well in my exams. I didn't have to go above and beyond. And
Mhm.
probably the wrong attitude, but it was fine.
Did you ever get pressure from your parents? I mean, especially in Sweden, your immigrant parents. I mean, I feel like no matter where they're from, they're all, the kids are that you got to study, you have to do well in school,
Yeah.
or were they a little bit more kind of trusting that you'll be fine, and more hands off?
I'm hoping my siblings are not watching this, but they, I would say academically, I was, what's a nice way of saying this? Um, Academically, I did generally better than my siblings, well, that's all you need to do, right? You just have to do better than your siblings, and then you get your parents off your back.
Are you the oldest?
Now I'm the middle.
You're in the
Yeah.
middle. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Uh,
So my siblings are both, super talented in other ways, but I wouldn't say, I don't know, studying maths or anything like that. That's not there. That's
yeah,
not much
yeah.
stronger than me in other areas. Yeah.
That's interesting. But did you also grow up with any like business owners or anything like that in your family as well? I mean, did you ever see that up close, or more kind of traditional careers kind of route?
Yeah, no, my father was a serial entrepreneur. He never had a job as far as I can remember. He would
Mhm.
just start businesses. And so that was the norm. My mom also tried her hand at business. She wasn't as successful, but so so yeah, maybe I've never thought about this. Maybe that influenced me growing up. So
Yeah,
although I did have a normal career for a long time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I mean, listen, I grew up in a household with, both parents had sort of corporate jobs, if you will. I grew up in New York City, and my parents were all similar to you, both computer programmers. And in New York City, there was a major Soviet diaspora after the Soviet Union fell, of like
Mhm.
people my parents' generation who were computer programmers and worked at these companies. And so I actually never saw entrepreneurship. I only saw, you have a stable job, you get up in the morning, you have your breakfast, you go to work, it
Yeah.
pays you relatively well, right? And
Mhm.
I always sort of strived for that. But the interesting thing is, and this is why I love asking this question, is because I feel like I kind of always had ideas, like little business ideas, or
Yeah.
even not a business idea, but just an intuition, like, oh, look at that. broken car down there. If only I could fix it up, I'd sell it for a little bit more. Like that there was a natural way of thinking, but it didn't have any kind of basis in reality because I didn't know how to take that kind of a thought and translate it into real life. And it took me a really long time to meet to meet people and see other folks doing this stuff and think, okay, maybe some of my ideas aren't stupid. Maybe actually they can be a business. You know what I mean? So that's why that's why I like to ask that. Maybe subconsciously you saw, your dad as an entrepreneur and maybe naturally said, well, let me sort of try the opposite, which is like the most stable career possible, which of course we'll get to in a minute. Working at large multinational companies. But
so what do you think? What do you think made you switch then? There must have been something at some point where you thought, okay, I'm going to give this a go, entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for asking. It's a great question. I think it's probably something similar to what you experienced, which is the idea that if I'm spending my time on this earth doing something, right, in terms of work, I really would love for it to be something that I believe brings value, that also I enjoy, that I get excitement out of, that I get sort of, it really like wakes me up in the morning and I can't wait to go do it. And it could be very I realize that the work itself could be very similar in nature. It's not like I became a sculptor, or like a gardener. I work in front of a computer just like I did before, and I work in tech just like I did before. But I realized that for me, it was working on my own terms and being able to explore my own thoughts and ideas without, much of a barrier. So, and we'll get to that for you as well. So as you were, growing up, you moved back to Nigeria, and then you moved to London for university, or you were a little bit younger, right? Did you finish high school in London, or you went straight to university?
I went to what's called college. I don't know what that's called in the US, but it's not university. I think you call university college, whatever it's called. But it's right before university for a couple of years in West London and Ealing. But I didn't originally come to live here. I came here on holiday and I just stayed, never left.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was supposed to be here and then go to Sweden after a while, but I enjoyed the summer too much, and I said, no, I'm going to make my own way. So walked in for an interview at McDonald's, and that was my first ever job and paid my bills.
Wow. And so were you living with roommates, or did you have any friends or family in London?
I had an aunt here, so I was staying with an aunt in West London, and I think this was a good thing. She says, okay, you're going to stay longer, then you've got to pay rent, which is why I got a job. So this might have more of an influence than anything else. I got a job at McDonald's I was working till 5 a.m. on a Friday.
Wow.
5 a.m. on a Saturday, and then 12 midnight on a Sunday. And then when I went to college in the week, that was further maths and physics. So it was, I think that period, that 2 years probably made more of a difference than I have no doubt maybe my father's way of living made a difference, but that sort of having to work really hard at a very young age, I think made a difference.
And this was while you were, in school, you decided at that time that you wanted to pursue computer science, and then I know you went to King's College in London. So were you thinking to yourself, you had this job, you're working late night, or I guess overnight, you were going to school during the day. It sounds like you're doing at least decently well, especially in maths, computer science, etc. Did you say to yourself, great, now I'm going to go get a job at a tech company, or did you think to yourself, startup world? This was a time when startups were really kind of booming.
No, nothing at all. It was all accident, if I'm being honest. I wish I had a master plan, but it was all an accident. So I was studying maths for the maths physics, and really liked. There was a maths teacher I had. His name is Joe Tibbetts from Newcastle, and he just seemed like quite laid back and would teach maths in a way that made it feel relatable. And so when I was getting to the end of college, I said, look, Joe, I don't know what I'm going to study after this. and he says he thinks computer science is going to be really big, and he thinks that I'll do well in it. So I didn't even look at anything else. I just said, well, where do I sign up? so
Wow.
so so yeah, it wasn't planned at all. It just happened because someone else was looking out for me.
I mean, and that's the power of a mentor or somebody who will at least take their time to get to know you, understand your strengths and weaknesses, and then have the, I think, wherewithal to give you a real recommendation.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
how was your experience then going into computer science? You went in, and you graduated. You obviously went into the consulting world. I mean, you worked at three of the big four over the years:
Yeah, yeah.
Deloitte, EY, and PwC.
Mm,
So, tell me a little bit about, I guess, your experience in that corporate world. I mean, you didn't grow up around it, right? Sounds like it was an accident. It's not like you were, reading business cases when you were 15 years old and thinking, gosh, I want to work in this kind of a job. So what was it, what was it like? Tell me a little bit about the roles. I mean, you and sort of, yeah, how your career evolved there.
um, so when I finished studying, someone told me that computer science wasn't cool, uh, and so I went into tax instead, which
Okay.
is much cooler.
Right.
To be very real, I was having conversations with a girl that I really liked,
Mm,
and she said something like, "Oh, like computer scientists are generally geeks."
right.
So that as a young man, that kind of thing like stands out in your head. So I thought, okay,
Mhm.
right, I'm gonna get a job where I wear a suit. I don't care what it is. Um, and so I applied for a job in the Big Four, and I got it. Um, I think the Big Four is a great training ground. So I don't know KPMG at all. I'll just generalize here around EY, Deloitte, and PwC.
Mhm.
Okay. So Deloitte, at least in the UK, they came out of Anderson, and they had a very sort of ambitious culture. So they would basically get rid of, I can't remember what it is, something like the bottom 10% of people. And everyone had a mini grade to try to get a promotion too. So everyone was super, super hardworking, trying to
Wow.
get that tiny promotion all the time. AY was different. AY wasn't the same in terms of ambition, I would say, a little bit slower, but they did organize themselves globally quite well. They were trying to have a global structure where every process is the same, everyone uses the same system. They would outsource a whole bunch of stuff to a center in India. They were just trying to be really efficient.
Mhm.
Um, I would say at Deloitte, I kind of enjoyed my career. I liked the friends that I made there. At EY, I wouldn't say I had the best of times ever, but PwC was the best employer I ever had. Absolutely amazing. Um, so I didn't plan on leaving EY, but PwC gave me a job where I basically got to travel the world and I got paid for it. And all I
Mhm.
had to do was to present tech and build tech. So it was a dream job.
So tell me about that, because obviously that ended up influencing a lot of, your views about global mobility, the products that you built, and then of course eventually that culminated into starting your own business and moving as far away from a stable Big Four job as possible, which is becoming an entrepreneur. So,
Yes.
what was your time at PwC? I know you eventually became director of digital solutions, and you were doing, kind of global, strategy from workforce standpoint and technology standpoint.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what were those jobs? What are some of the countries you visited, and kind of what would your assignments be, in general, obviously, in those countries?
Um, so it started off with a trip to New York. My first trip was to PwC was to New York actually to present
Mhm.
to I think I'm allowed to say this now, the New York Times. And I thought, wow,
Mhm.
this is amazing, iconic brand. And I didn't know anything, but I was brand new in the company and I was asked to present what the company's technology did. So I did a lot of studying on plane, studying when I was there and presented. And we won it. It was amazing. It was basically a pitch. Then I was sent for a few months to California, to San Jose. And then afterwards, it was lots of short trips, sometimes a week, sometimes a few days, across Canada, across Europe, various countries. And usually it was either for some sort of a conference where I would be presenting what we're doing, or to speak to a client that had some issue where they thought technology could solve the issue, or it was a competitive tender, like an RFP, a request for a proposal. And usually the local PwC team would be very welcoming, because it's somebody traveling from sort of the UK to come and help them to solve a client problem or to win a pitch. So really good times.
Any memorable countries? Anything that was sort of, I mean, okay, New York, California, understood. A lot of people travel there. Anything more obscure?
There's a place in Denmark called Aarhus. And if you look it up, this has been voted the happiest place on earth several times over.
Okay.
And I'd never heard of Aarhus, but I went there, and people are generally really happy, really friendly, really welcoming, to a point where you go, well, what do you want from me? Is there some,
right.
some agenda or something? But yeah, I would say that sticks in my mind. The people from PwC in Canada, Belgium, Sweden, super welcoming whenever I was there. So sometimes it's the places, but sometimes it's the people.
It's the people. Yeah, that's awesome. So can you share a little bit about, I mean, I know you were implementing, I mean, obviously PwC is a company that builds a host of different technologies. When did you start to get to know the global mobility industry? Obviously you were going on short-term assignments. You were the beneficiary of a variety of visas when you needed them, of course, depending on where you're traveling. And so there was that part. Were you also working on projects that were related to workforce planning and sort of global mobility and strategy from the technology standpoint?
Yeah, throughout my career, apart from the last maybe couple of years, it was all global mobility. And so it was dealing with companies that have their people moving around the world, and their people, sometimes it would be really boring stuff like a tax briefing. I don't know if you know what a tax briefing is.
No.
Someone say, Roman, you're coming from New York to London. I tell you about the tax rules in London. I tell you about residence. I tell you about double taxation reliefs. We're going to give you a calendar to track your days. You're going to get a questionnaire, and then we're going to help you file your UK return and your US return. And then we'll do that day in, day out for months on end. Add a few like canned jokes here and there just to keep myself entertained. But yes, that's
thrilling. Thrilling.
Yeah. The other thing is preparing or reviewing UK tax returns, US tax returns for people who are moving across borders. But the more interesting stuff is companies are looking to restructure their global mobility programs. They're looking to transform, especially if you have a global mobility team that wants to take on business travelers, right? So for many years, they were looking after longer term assignees, long-term, short-term, and permanent transfers. And then the government authorities and some US states start to get people to look at either state-to-state travel in the US or international travel for short-term projects or short-term business trips. That I found to be interesting. And half of what I was doing was, in the last couple of years at PwC, was in a group you mentioned called Workforce Strategy and Culture. So this is nothing to do with global mobility, but the overall workforce. How do we get the best out of our workforce? And bizarrely, these two teams were usually disconnected. So the head of mobility and the head of talent usually wouldn't speak to each other at all. Strange. But those are the two worlds that I was working across.
And so obviously, I would imagine making that, especially after being global mobility for so long, making that connection and talking to workforce, strategy people and saying, how can you not, when you're strategizing around moving the best people, to the best teams or the most fitting projects, how can you not take into account who your team members are in other countries and what skills they have, what experiences they have, and how
Yes.
can you organize that workforce globally, not just domestically.
Exactly. And Roman, there was almost no client had a data-driven way of making those decisions around where to move people. And even the few that didn't really understand immigration and tax rules. And I'm talking about the world of talent and strategic workforce planning. And so it was very much, if it was data driven, it was basically skills based only, but not anything to do with actual reality of compliance, cost, timelines, so on. And the opposite was also true. So the global mobility teams were usually doing very transactional work, if you like. At least that's what it was being seen by the organization. So the organization was usually not tapping into very, very important talent that they had themselves in the mobility team, and basically using that team as a transactional unit that basically moves someone from A to B, but is never involved in the decisions around who's the right candidate or anything else like that. So, yeah, I found out that intersection when we started to do that. I found that particularly interesting, much more than preparing tax returns.
So as you're going through all this, I mean, what was that moment then where you know, number one, started to maybe think about the idea of, well, let's build some technology or some solution to combine these different silos, if you will, and then
Yeah.
sort of can you talk a little bit about, you know, what was the thing that pushed you to
Mm.
leave this really, you know, decade plus? I mean, you
Yeah.
were working in the Big Four for 12, you know, 13 years at this point, you know, to leave that and actually pursue this concept, this idea.
Um, this doesn't sound great, but actually it ends well. So I was out on my lunch break, and two police officers in the city of London stopped me and said I fit a written description of a suspect. So, so they had a piece of paper in a hand. It was a black male wearing a black suit, dark rimmed glasses, and possibly an afro. That's the description I remember. And based on, and I said, "Do you have a picture?" And they said, "No, we don't. But you fit the description too well." So before I knew it, I was in handcuffs. I was being read my rights. There were
Wow.
police vans everywhere, and I got taken to Ludgate Police Station, and they're allowed to hold you for up to 24 hours without charge. So they held me for 23 hours. So I had the pleasure of spending a night in the cell and having a lot of time to think. So the thought I had in my head is there are a lot of decisions that are made by humans today that are um, full of cognitive biases, sometimes conscious, but usually unconscious. And I work in an industry where that happens all the time. It's easy to see another industry, right? And to be judgmental of what they're doing. But actually, what we are doing is we're sending people all around the world. And usually, someone gets a tap on the shoulder and says, We think you're the right person to fill this role. But actually, there could be lots of other people, if you had the right data, who would be more fitting for that role, only if that company or those individuals were armed with the right technology and armed with the right data. So that's where the seed started. I didn't launch just then, but I had this seed in my mind that I'm going to do something different in our industry, different from just moving people from A to B, doing compliance, doing automations. There's got to be something that means more. So although it's not a nice story to sit there, but at least it gave me time to think and maybe a change for the positive.
Yeah,
Spoiler
I
alert,
mean,
it wasn't me. I didn't go robbing places in my spare time.
yeah. Well, that's good. That's a good fact. But you know, like you said, it's. I mean, presumably, it was a blessing in disguise. A really kind of traumatic and surely upsetting experience for you, your team, your family, led to, I guess, forcing you to really just sit and think about things and contemplate, I guess, your life, but also what was happening. It's not like you were contemplating even your decisions. I mean, you know, you hear stories like that where people actually did something wrong and then they get, you know, punished, and then through that punishment they get to reflect, and that's great. That's a separate story. You were sitting there thinking, I'm not guilty. I didn't do this thing. There's been a mistake, so of course you will be free. But what does this situation mean? It means that someone could just throw me into this position based on biases, that can throw me into this position based on, as you said, honestly, lack of data. They had no picture. That means they had no data. They had no video proof. They had no, this isn't like it was 50, 60 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So there,
Yes.
so,
Yes.
and so I think it's really fascinating to think about that. When you put all of these things together, though, okay, fine, you had an idea, a seed of an idea, but again, you and your life choices didn't, like, quote unquote, land you in the cell. So you went back to work and kind of like as you did before, but suddenly now you're this comfortable job. You've been growing, in your career. You've been going from one company to another. You've landed in this place where you just said a few minutes ago was the best employer you've ever had. But you still left, right? You still did eventually go off on your own. Did you have maybe a moment or a series of moments where you eventually said, you know what, I'm going to try this?
Yeah, definitely. So there is a partner. His name is Craig. He actually retired this week. So Craig, if you're watching, thank you so much. But
Congratulations.
Yes, he was phoning up the police and he was furious. He was basically saying, this guy works for us. He works in a big four firm. He's qualified. He doesn't do this kind of stuff. And he was, they told me that he had been phoning up. And when I go back in the office, he kind of gave me more support than I thought I would get from someone really senior of a completely different demographic group. And I also remember sort of people gathering around my desk. It's almost like if you're having a leaving do or a birthday, when people get around just to hear what the hell happened.
Yeah.
And someone asked me if that always happens, and I said no, never when I'm walking around on my lunch break. When I'm driving, I get stopped and searched all the time. And this guy said, well, I've been driving in London for 20 years or something. I've never been stopped and searched. Okay. We're both looking at each other like aliens, like, you've never been stopped. I know the routine. I actually know exactly what to do, sometimes better than some of the police officers. So anyway, fast forward to trying to do something in the space. PwC, I said earlier on, was a great employer. One of the things they did was to give me freedom to build stuff. Some of the stuff I built was to do with global mobility. Some of the stuff I worked in teams to do had nothing to do with global mobility. One thing, which you can see a preview on my LinkedIn, is it's a virtual reality experience where you put on a VR headset, and for 20 minutes, you're someone of a different demographic group, and you see how the world treats you differently from what you're used to.
Wow.
At the time, we ran the biggest study of its kind at PwC, and some of the feedback that came back was that it was 4 times, so 400% more memorable than watching a video about these kinds of stuff.
You literally put yourself in someone's shoes.
Yes, it was actually called In My Shoes. That's the name of it.
There you go. Yeah.
The other stat that stood out was 3.75 times more emotional connection to the content than traditional learning. So our first character was a black male technologist that worked for a big 4 firm, obviously a fictional character here.
Right, of course.
and stuff is happening that you may not have realized happens in day-to-day life. And you're having to navigate and make decisions to not alienate yourself or your colleagues, but at the same time navigate your career. So that was one of the things that PwC did in giving me freedom to build things, where it gave me more confidence to say, you can have a seed of an idea, work with a team of talented people, and grow that into something that's a real product that's being used by real people, not just at PwC, but a whole bunch of PwC's clients. So that's one example of something that gave me confidence to say, well, I could do this on a regular basis.
That's amazing. And that actually goes towards the idea that you had of, the world has biases, and what can I do to use my skills and my life experience to sort of, combat bias, or at the very least make people aware of their biases and give them more information. Um, so I want to take a very quick pause before we move on, because now I want to get to where you've had these experiences, and you've now had this motivation and confidence to build something, and you eventually go off and you start the Cozm. But before we do that, I just want to give a quick thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, which is a company called Lex Reception. So for any immigration lawyers, or frankly any legal professionals out there, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service that provides phone call answering and message answering in real time. They schedule appointments with either clients or prospects. They're basically 24/7 legal answering specialists for law firms and legal teams, so that those teams don't have to worry about missing phone calls or messages from clients or prospects ever again. And Lex Reception can also proactively reach out to somebody who's previously contacted the firm, effectively like a sales team. So Lex Reception has a lot of different integrations with a lot of technology companies that law firms, in the US particularly, but surely around the world as well, use for case management, such as Clio and Practice Panther, LawPay for billing, and lots of other tech companies. So you can add Lex Reception into your tech stack. So if you're a law firm, immigration law firm, or any other law firm or legal team, and you're interested in just learning more about them, check them out. There's a specific link. You can visit lexreception.com, but there's a link in the notes of this episode that gives listeners of the show $250 off their first month of service. So do check them out if you're interested, and thank you, Lex Reception. Okay, Benjamin. So you've had these experiences. You've been traveling around the world, for your team. You've also been working in global mobility and building some technology and products in global mobility. And then you've obviously, in addition to that, had this unfortunate, but maybe, life-changing experience that sort of puts you in the mindset of, okay, there's something more that I want to do in this life. You eventually leave. Well, I guess you don't actually leave first. I guess you end up when the immigration and tax team spins off of PwC and becomes Vialto Partners. You work there for a little bit, but you do eventually then leave PwC/Vialto to launch the Cozm. So tell me now a little bit, what is the Cozm? What does it do? Who does it serve? And what is the product like? Where are you today with it?
One thing that I got exposure to early on was a very early use case of AI. It's probably more machine learning than AI, but I was sent on a secondment to a client. I thought I was going to Kingston in Jamaica, but I went to Kingston in Surrey. It's like an hour from where I live. to Unilever, and Unilever had a program called the Future Leaders Program, and they were struggling with gender diversity in this program. They engaged with a company called HireVue, which had a very early AI interview model. They used to replace the first round interview, and the second round interview was still done by humans. In 12 months, we managed to increase gender diversity by 14%, 1-4. And the thing I found that was really interesting is you had an old AI model, which clearly would have bias in it, during the first round, a human during the second round, which obviously a human has bias in them. But the combination of these two systems was leading to a better result than if you had a human doing the first and a human doing the second. And that's one of the first times where I had this thought that you can, it's not it's not about automating work entirely. It's not about having humans doing work, but you can get a better result if you augment the human and digital intelligence together. It's possible. So having 14% more female candidates being successful in that sort of um, it it encouraged me, should I say, to pursue down this route. So the Cozm is derived from the Greek word cosmos, but that domain name was too expensive, so we called it Cozm. And and the idea is that everyone around the world, if they have the right skills, the right talent and work ethic, doesn't matter where they're from, their gender, ethnicity, neurodiversity, or any other factors, they should be able to fill that role. And all we need is to arm global mobility professionals with the right technology and tools to be able to tackle not just automation of the stuff they do today, but to give them the data so they can have more of an influence on the talent strategy in the organization. So that's the name. What we do right now on a practical basis is we started off with business travel compliance.
Mm.
So short-term trips are actually very complex now. You have to worry about income tax, corporate tax, permanent establishment, immigration. If you're in the US, you have to worry about different state taxes. Um, in Europe, A1, so International Social Security Certificates, is a big deal. And then there's a new regulation, newish regulation in terms of implementation. It's called the Posted Workers Directive. You basically have to register. It's almost like an immigration law. And these things are hard to deal with through human effort alone. So we do that. One of our first clients was Cisco Systems, probably famous for WebEx.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a project in the Paris Olympics where they basically couldn't get anyone to do all this complex stuff for the travelers going into Paris fast enough, because this stuff has to be done pretty fast before these people arrive and at a reasonable cost. So because we're not using humans to type these forms away, we're able to do these things that should take weeks in seconds, and stuff that should cost hundreds of pounds to a fraction of that amount. So so we grew from there and won other clients like Adidas and others, just doing that. Today we've expanded more broadly, so we do assignment management technologies. So a lot of mobility professionals need to do cost estimates. If they get a request from the business to move someone, they need to initiate an immigration provider, a tax provider, a relocation provider. Managing them and getting them to do what they want, what they're supposed to do, is hard. It's hard work. And so instead of having them sitting on a platform and doing the clicking and typing, we basically have AI agents that do a bunch of the work for them. And we are not perfect in that area, but we're growing more and more in doing more and more of the heavy lifting, so the humans that work in that team can do more strategic stuff that's more appropriate for humans.
How do you manage the fact that different jurisdictions within Europe, but even potentially within a country? I mean, I recently had a guest on who had been working through immigration rules in Switzerland, and apparently every canton there has different rules as well. You know,
Yes.
in the US it's federal, but you know, maybe in Canada there are some provincial rules. You know, and so how do you deal with that in terms of, you know, the agents being able to know the the correct workflow and to do it correctly and all that?
It's a great question, and it's almost like we planned it, but we didn't plan it.
We did plan it.
No. So there's a lady called Gloria that works for a Swiss company, and she says Switzerland's a nightmare because every canton, like you says, has their own minimum wage requirements, and it's quite hard to get all the data that you need from their systems. They use SAP SuccessFactors, gets from systems, gets from multiple different payrolls. Make sure, like, is Roman paid enough for his role and his experience and other stuff to go into this particular Swiss canton? So, And she says this is all she does all day long. She hates it, but that's what she does. And I said, well, Gloria, we could automate your day job in about a week. Do you want us to automate your day job? And she said she doesn't think it's possible, but she hadn't met me before then. So
Nice.
it took us exactly 8 business days to automate what she does, what she used to do, which is to build an agent. The agent's name is Eli. Eli gets all the data that you need from various systems within her company, finds what canton this person is supposed to be sent to, goes onto the government portal to find out how much this person is supposed to be paid, calculates the difference, sends instructions to payroll, follows up with payroll if you keep Eli on autopilot and so on. So it's just one of the many agents that we build to tackle, like you say, complex, not just country specific, but regional and sometimes city specific regulations.
Now, do you have to have the country's rules be published electronically, I presume? Because what if they're not? I mean, I remember I was talking to an attorney who was an immigration attorney. I think she was in Ghana. This is a few years ago, or maybe it was another West. Maybe it was another Southwest Cote d'Ivoire. I don't, but And I remember she was saying that sometimes you just show up to the government office and there's been a new policy and there's no update anywhere. It just, in order for you to get the update, you have to physically show up and you see the new policy taped onto the door. And I remember we had this conversation because I was the only tech guy in the room. She said, Roman, this is the reality of what we're working with, but my gosh, I wish we had technology. Can you help? And this predates ChatGPT. This was, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought to myself, there's no way. So what do you think about, situations like that? Do we have to wait for them to digitize their, government policymaking first in order to then be able to layer some AI agents on top of that?
No. So there are countries where you simply cannot automate the end-to-end process. You have to have a human in the loop. So when most people say AI, they're referring to artificial intelligence. I'm pretty sure that would be deemed disrespectful at some point. We think of that as augmented intelligence. So there are elements that are digital, and sometimes there are elements that are human. Sometimes you do need a human, like in your example, to walk up to the immigration or tax office and read the sign, knock on the door, sit there for 2 hours, wait for the turn to speak to the authorities and say, what are the rules today?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's interesting. And I guess in that sense, as long as the official policies are like that, you can't automate away entire jobs.
Yes.
But of course, I think that's probably a little bit more of an exception rather than the rule, but nevertheless, it exists. So your clients, I mean, you mentioned that you started with Cisco, you've had some other clients. Do you typically work with the corporate, in-house mobility team? Do you, or a lot of my audience and the folks who listen to the show are immigration providers. So maybe they're immigration lawyers or consultants or relocation management companies that do a little bit of the, business travel or short-term assignments, et cetera. Do you also have software for, or solutions for those folks?
Yeah. So we do systems for immigration firms. Some of are really official online. So, for example, CIBT Newland Chase is an official partner of ours where we build technologies for. Some relocation companies, again, another official one is Santa Fe Relocation, where we do work for them. Generally, if people are traveling for business purposes, business travel or short-term trips, we have a technology that, for example, Santa Fe use for their clients to help track, do you need a work permit for this trip? Do you need a business visa? Is there some sort of a tax implication of you traveling? And there's some employment law implications? And if they are, can you automate as much as possible without human involvement in the downstream compliance? So yes, we do work for relocation companies, immigration firms, and tax firms.
And is this so is the Cozm more of a SaaS platform, or is it more of a kind of, I mean, I hate to use this term, but let's say development shop where someone comes into you and says, look, we've got this problem. Can you use maybe your software, but build us a custom solution? Or are you some sort of a kind of combination of the two?
We are a bit like most tech companies are today. We're a combination of the two. So Um, the normal SaaS shape was we have this box and you fit into this box. And if you don't fit in, then we'll put you on a roadmap. And maybe in 6 months' time, we'll do something about that.
Mhm.
Um, the technology landscape has changed so dramatically only in the last year, the last 2 years, 3 years. So if someone says, okay, I like your SaaS solution, but can it do X, Y, and Z? It's much, much easier for us to say yes and not have someone sit there for months and wait for us to deliver that.
AI has, by the way, an artificial intelligence. That AI, not augmented intelligence, has made, I think, it much easier. And it's interesting because if you remember, I don't know if you follow U.S. stock market. I don't know if the London Stock Exchange was impacted, but when Claude came out with Claude Code, SaaS stocks tanked. I mean, the technology sector tanked because everyone said, this is it. This is the end of technology companies, because anybody with an idea within any organization can now vibe code their way into a meaningful product. And I
Yes.
think there's some truth to that for sure. I mean, if you're building, it's funny because OpenAI and Claude now have really great commercials, on TV, and they compete with each other. Sometimes they even make fun of each other in their own commercials. It's great. But one of the commercials I saw was for one of them, or maybe it was even another, vibe coding app, but it was effectively a bunch of team members in an organization suddenly realizing that they could build apps on their own without having a tech team, without even having tech backgrounds. And then it cut to a scene of them building, one of them built like a, an automated recipe like builder, and another one did some kind of inventory thing, so kind of more relevant. And then the last scene was like a guy who said, what about an in-office dating app? And then everybody got really uncomfortable, and he said, no, for dogs, for our dogs. And so I think the idea was you could do literally anything, but the
Yes.
reality, I think, is that look, if you're gonna build something that's really low risk, yeah, sure, go vibe code a little dashboard that says how many times did I get coffee throughout the week, and whatever,
Yes.
right? But if you're
Yes.
going to build something that's meaningful, that actually uses client data, et cetera,
Mm.
you're not going to vibe code it. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You need to have experts such as yourself, who have the experience, who have first of all, the knowledge, software engineering, second of all, the experience in building real enterprise platforms. And so I think, to your point about the definition of AI, how good it is right now is just it's a reflection of how well people use it who already know how to do it, versus how well can people, quote unquote, build something who don't know how to code. Like, I don't think that's where the real use case, that's going to be fun. But I feel, at least for the next, let's say for foreseeable future, I think the real use cases will still be tech companies who can accelerate, can build faster, can build maybe even a little bit better, but they still need to be tech companies at their core.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 100% with you. Do you know Mythos? Have you heard of Mythos at all from Anthropic?
Yeah, the one that they're not releasing to the public
Yes.
because it's
Yes.
too dangerous. Yeah.
Well, apparently it's much better at identifying vulnerabilities than patching vulnerabilities.
Mm.
So I think we're getting to an era where if someone wants to vibe code a dating app for the pets, I think that's a great idea. What could go wrong? Okay.
Right.
Um, and so where people talk about SaaS stock disappearing, like Workday and Microsoft, I don't think that's the same thing, because for everyone that vibe codes an HR system, there are bad actors out there who are also armed with AI, and they're rubbing their hands together. They can't wait
Mhm.
to get a hold of that kind of tech. And so as much as if someone gave me, I don't know, a Formula One car to drive, I would think this is amazing. I can drive this stuff if I get enough lessons. Doesn't make me Lewis Hamilton. Doesn't mean I'm
Right.
going to start driving Formula One professionally. It's dangerous. I think people that think that B2B SaaS can be vibe coded are probably going to come across all kinds of security issues and that would probably be the headlines in the next 3 to 6 months.
By the way, using that analogy, which I love, I would also say, imagine somebody told you, because Formula One cars, they can go 200 plus miles an hour. I mean, they're insane. They're computers. I mean, they're machines, right?
Yes. Yes.
Imagine somebody told you that, oh, well, just, the guy, the mechanic, the guy down the road who just watched the Formula One Netflix show and became a lover, he actually vibe coded this car, Would you trust it with your life? Would you trust it to go 200 miles an hour around tight turn and deploy an airbag or something? And to me, that's the vulnerability. It might look pretty. It might look like a Formula One car on the outside, but once you start digging into it, it actually has a lot of vulnerabilities. So I love that analogy, because the flip side is, if someone said to you, hey, I've actually been working at Ferrari for the last 20 years, and I just built this car using, AI, that to me, that means you've done something faster and better than you could have done before, but you also have the knowledge and experience to double check to make sure that the core is still correct and it's safe and it's, whatever.
Yes.
So yeah, I love that analogy.
Yeah. I think there's going to be a period, and I don't know how long this is, where the public will be fooled by this stuff, by a bunch of enthusiastic vibe coders, which is not actually dangerous, but there are actual investors that are putting money into vibe coders, and I find that fascinating. I don't know how long this is going to last for.
Yeah, it's happening now, but I definitely agree with you. Yeah, I agree.
So what I heard is that this happened in the .com era, where someone would just put a .com at the end of their URL, and that was enough to get any investor to pay you any money. I think we're now in that .com era at the moment, and it might last 6 months or so.
So basically, if you're trading stocks, you can make some short-term gains on the AI companies. But if this is indeed a bubble, if it bursts, make sure to also have some of the more traditional companies in your portfolio, because once the money stops flowing to all the AI companies, it will start flowing to the stuff that's like tried and true.
Yeah, I do think that AI will deliver a ton of value,
of course,
in the hands of specialists, in the hands of, in our analogy, a Lewis Hamilton, not in the hands of some guy that just turned up and so this looks cool.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, and I think that makes me feel more comfortable and confident from an industry perspective, because there are so many companies popping up in mobility and immigration that are, AI companies, and I think the people behind them are all very well-meaning. It's not that anyone's trying to be a grifter and put .com at the end to get $1 million and disappear. They're really trying to build something good, but if it's coming from somebody that doesn't really have experience building and or doesn't have experience with mobility, they just, I don't know, their buddy told them that it was annoying and they're entrepreneurial, and they did 10 minutes of research and said, let me build a company. I think those companies are going to be at risk. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. But on the flip side, those companies where you do have genuine engineering talent in them, and they have genuine domain expertise, so that could be tax, it could be immigration, employment law, and that's in the founding team, not employees. I think this is a great time. I genuinely do.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. So, okay, with the Cozm, as we kind of wrap up here, what are you seeing? You mentioned you work with some corporates. You obviously work with some immigration firms, relocation firms. Where do you see the company kind of going, let's say, in the next near future, 1 to 3 years? I mean, are more features or more countries, or like what's your growth trajectory or plan for the company?
It's to continue down the promise that we've made, which is people that work in global mobility, that's in-house professionals and service providers, will spend less time on repetitive work. They will be freed up more than they can imagine. But that's not to sit on a beach somewhere. That is to repurpose that time to do work that is more aligned with the talent strategy of the organization. And I feel like we're doing well in that first bit. We haven't done enough in that second bit. We're just starting to do that right now. So that's where I see the company going. And it's we're going through a time that's clearly going to be a little bit jarring because a lot of people need to learn new skills that they've never learned before. So we do not just engaging with clients to help them to digitize and use our products, we also do training sessions. So we have one coming up on the 11th here in London. We have another one coming up in Madrid, and then in Paris, in France. And it's typically a workshop where we move away from slide presentation and theory around AI, and global mobility leaders basically get to see what's actually happening, what technology is out there, how does it impact their careers, who's using it, who's not. For those that are using it, how do they get started, and what kind of skills do you need? Because basically, we have a chance of helping people future-proof their careers, and this industry has given us so much.
Do you see more companies? I mean, because you're working with corporates and immigration firms, do you see more companies, i.e., corporates, bringing immigration mobility in-house, or do you still see the industry staying the same? And I asked this because I was at a few conferences recently where that question came up. I have seen, I don't know if I can call this a trend, but I've definitely seen a few companies reaching out to me about our software, which is, and our software supports a legal, compliance, immigration compliance process that often, still, most by a large stretch, is done by the lawyer. However, I've seen a few companies reach out and say, "Hey, we're interested," and I'd reply and say, "Great, here's all the information, but also what outside counsel are you working with? Maybe whatever." And their response would be, "Well, yeah, we're working with these firms, but we want to take this process in-house."
Yes.
They're not taking everything in-house, but they're little by little, they're taking some stuff. Have you seen that at all? Like, because obviously you're working with both kind of corporates and providers. Have you seen corporates start to look at the software that's available and say, okay, we're going to keep the real heavy lifting legal stuff to the outside counsel or outside firms or RMCs, but maybe let's take this other little piece that we used to outsource and bring it inside or in-house?
Yeah, definitely. So some of the very larger organizations out there have insourced sometimes immigration work. Sometimes they'll have an immigration lawyer in-house. They have insourced some work that we now automate to do with A1, certificate of coverage, postal workers notifications. And that's usually because they have really large volumes. Sometimes, if I'm being honest, some of the big four firms haven't digitized enough. They haven't stepped their game up to a point where they can keep some of these larger clients, and so they've moved away. Okay, not always, but sometimes.
If only the big four knew somebody who had experience in the big four and was building some software for them.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that the big four would actually move that way. I mean, we have conversations, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm teasing.
Yeah. I do think though that there are opposite scenarios as well. The scenarios where work that has been done in-house is now being outsourced to a managed services team, right? So a managed services team is basically an outsourced provider. So we're seeing traffic both ways.
That's actually interesting because I haven't heard that too much. And when I only hear the first part, service providers see it as doom and gloom, where, everything that we're doing is, at risk. So it's actually great to hear that it ebbs and flows. Okay, well, I like to end these episodes on a particular question. And thank you so much for sharing your whole story. This is a little bit more kind of maybe philosophical, if you will, but instead of asking people, what advice would you give to your younger self, or what advice would you give to another entrepreneur? I like to ask the question that is, what advice are you heeding now? Like, what advice are you listening to today, given where you are with the business or with your, trajectory as a founder or whatever? Like, what's that advice that's keeping you going in today, this week, etc.?
Someone said that they are reflecting on their mistakes and forcing themselves to write down their mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, that's great advice, because wow, do we make the same mistakes over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to focus on your strengths and keep pushing and improving in areas that you're strong at. But I personally now, in the last few weeks, have been reflecting quite a lot on my mistakes and things that I get wrong, and also trying to get myself to write what are mistakes am I probably going to make now? What mistakes am I going to make in the coming weeks and months? And forcing yourself to write that is very enlightening. I'm finding that to be much more powerful than writing my goals.
Wow, that's cool. I'd never heard that one before. I like that. You're starting to make me think I should probably do the same. I mean, it sounds like really great advice. I'm going to try it, and I'll report back to you. That's great. I immediately thought of a few mistakes that I've made, let's say over the past couple of years that I've made a few times, because after I made them, I felt them. But then when it came up again, I guess I didn't, maybe because I didn't write it down. I made it again. I made it again. I knew I was making it, but I made it again. So that's very interesting. Very interesting.
What's your reflection then from right now? So same question to you.
Yeah. Right now I went through a period of saying no a lot, because I got burnt out because I said yes to everything.
Yeah.
And I was, too overwhelmed. And then I figured, okay, I need to set boundaries. And it was a really, really positive experience for me to feel grounded and confident and start saying no to maybe some clients, or maybe pushing back on, or prospective clients, or maybe pushing back on existing clients a little bit when I felt that they were, let's just say, taking advantage, or, something that didn't align. And now I think I've gone, I don't want to say too far, but I think I've said it enough times where I'm kind of trying to say yes to ideas again. I kept those boundaries where I feel that my personal space is being respected, but with that came no's to ideas. I was saying no too much because I was trying to give myself space.
Yeah.
So now I'm starting to say yes again, but trying to determine what to say yes to. So I'm not saying yes to disrespect from clients, or prospective clients, or whatever.
Yes.
I'm still a hard no on that, but I'm starting to say yes again to interesting ideas, or to meeting with somebody who maybe before I was like whatever, to see where things go. So it's been fun for the past few months.
Cool. Yeah, that's we started this conversation with me saying I'd like to meet another entrepreneur, because that's the kind of dilemma which my normal friends and family don't understand. They think I'm being funny when I say I have to say no to a lot of things. But once you start something, it takes over your life, and you have to learn to say no. And like you say, you might go too far sometimes.
Yeah, and that's just the way that it ebbs and flows. But if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, if you say yes to something, I think you have to give it your all. And that's when people burn out. They start giving their all to too many things.
Yes.
Well, Benjamin, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing your life and your journey, your career, everything you're building now. Where can people find you, and how can they find your company?
Yeah, they could just go to www.thecozm.com. If they want to attend one of our events, they could just go /AI events. This is where, if you're a global mobility professional in-house or service provider, and you want to know how AI is going to impact you and your careers, you can do that. If you just go to the main site, thecozm.com, that's more for companies that want to buy technology, like cutting edge technology for managing international business travel or traditional global mobility.
And if they want to connect with you, do you recommend LinkedIn?
Yeah, yes, LinkedIn. LinkedIn would be the place. Do you normally give out your email? Do you normally?
I do not. Nope.
No.
I definitely do not.
Learning from you.
I definitely say LinkedIn. So and by the way, just for folks who might be listening on audio only, The website is the Cozm, is THECOZM. I was trying to be English there. ZM.com. So thecosm.com. So Benjamin, thank you again for being here, for staying a little bit late, because it's, you're 5 hours ahead in the UK, and I am excited for your growth. So hopefully we'll have you back on in a few years.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Roman. It's a really good show. Really enjoyed speaking to you.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Enjoy the weekend, sir.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Amazing episode, amazing conversation. If you are in the global mobility space, again, and especially if you're not just focused on U.S. immigration or U.S. global mobility, check out Benjamin on LinkedIn, check out the Cozm, their website, and see if there's anything you guys can do together. Before we finish up here, I just want to give a quick thank you one more time to the main sponsor of this episode, 8 a.m. DocketWise. So again, to immigration lawyers out there, immigration teams in-house as well, DocketWise is an end-to-end immigration case management platform which provides best-in-class immigration forms that your beneficiaries can fill out, petitioners can fill out, et cetera, in a lot of different languages. So you can work with clients from all over the world. They have customizable questionnaires, tons of industry-leading integrations for any platforms that that do services they don't do. By the way, DocketWise was the first company ever, I believe, in the immigration industry that published an open API, which was very, very cool. So they've been doing this for a while and have been at the cutting edge for a while as well. DocketWise also has a lot of great resources for immigration practitioners by way of their blog and ebook and podcast, and just really great free information. So if you're interested in a case management system or just learning a little bit more about DocketWise, check them out. There's a link in the show notes, or visit 8am. That's the number 8am.com/DocketWise. So thank you, everybody. Oh, one last thing. We had a couple of comments here I forgot to mention. Ferzin Chapgar said, Ben, I love your honest story and how things seem to fall into place because you stayed open and didn't resist the journey. I totally forgot to bring that up earlier, but thank you, Ferzin. And I totally agree with you. I was going to say earlier how Benjamin said, I just took computer science because, somebody told me that it's a good thing for me, and it worked out great. And then, I went into, the Big Four because somebody told me that would be a cooler job, and just all of these things worked out well. And I think being open to people's thoughts, whether they're trusted sources or maybe just somebody whose opinion you admire, I think it's always great to be open. And Ferzine also said she couldn't agree more that PwC has a strong culture. So thank you, Ferzine, for the comments there. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, for tuning in, for your comments, for your likes, etc. See you on the next episode. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe and peace out.